A young boy stands in the square, slowly releasing a blue balloon with a trembling wish. The whole sky seems to pause. Kojo used to be invisible, used to believe dreams belonged only to the wealthy. But today the entire city looks up at his balloon. It's not just air, it's hope. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us for more powerful storytelling journeys ahead. This story began on a sun-drenched afternoon when I was just a boy selling balloons by the park gate. No one knew my name, and no one ever looked back. A faint sound, first paper rustling, then a breath. The light comes in soft at first like a sunrise, trying to break through fog. Wish a boy's voice whispers, fly. Then darkness is replaced by a vast Ghanaian sky, deep cobalt blue, brushed by streaks of fading orange from the dying sun. And in this vast sky, a cluster of balloons, red, yellow, blue, white, rise in slow motion, tethered to nothing, ascending with an eerie grace. The camera follows their floating journey upward, delicate, weightless, then begins to tilt downward, as if falling back to earth. Cut to the bustling entrance of Labadi Beach Park, Accra. Late afternoon. Heat still radiates from the ground. Vendors shout, music blares from a radio. Children laugh and dart between groups of tourists. Life is moving fast, but then, as if out of time, Kojo, a solitary figure. He stands just beyond the entrance gate, a bundle of balloons gripped tightly in one hand, the other resting on a rusted bicycle frame. 17 years old. Thin, eyes sunken yet bright, face older than his years. Clothes washed too many times, shoes with soles worn thin. But standing tall. Around him, life rushes by. Couples snapping selfies, ice cream melting on a toddler's chin, a tourist bargaining for bead necklaces. But Kojo, he does not move, does not shout to sell, does not chase customers like other hawkers. He watches the sky, he counts his breaths, and then he lowers his gaze and looks at the balloons. Each balloon is carefully tied with a tiny strip of paper. On every slip, in childlike uneven script, wish of the invisible. He takes one balloon, a pale yellow one, fingers trembling slightly, and gently smooths the paper tied to it. His lips move as he reads silently the wish he wrote earlier that morning. Let my sister Ama be healed. Let her laugh again. He exhales deep. His face hardens not in bitterness, but in will. He turns toward the crowd. A small boy tugs at his mother's skirt nearby. The woman glances toward Kojo, considers, then nods. They approach. Kojo smiles, careful, practiced. Good afternoon, madam. One balloon. The woman's eyes flicker over the boy's gaunt frame, the worn state of his bicycle. How much? Kojo names the price, modest, barely enough for a meal. As she fumbles for coins, the boy beside her gazes up at the balloons in wonder. What's the paper, the boy asks. Kojo kneels to eye level. It's a wish, he says softly. You write what you hope for. The balloon carries it high, so maybe someone will see. The mother hesitates, but then hands him the coins. Kojo selects a bright red balloon, unties the strip of paper, offers it to the child, along with a small stub of pencil. Go on, he encourages. The boy writes in crooked letters, I wish I had a dog. Kojo smiles, gently reties the wish, hands the balloon back. The boy beams. As they leave, the mother casts Kojo a lingering glance. Pity, or perhaps something deeper. Cut to later. The sun dips lower. Shadows stretch long. The crowd thins as evening approaches. Kojo counts the remaining balloons. 7 left. Enough perhaps for rice tonight. But then he looks at his battered watch. His breath catches. Almost 6. He shoves the balloons into a worn canvas bag, hops onto the rickety bicycle pedals furiously down the dusty road. Montage, his legs pumping the pedals with desperate urgency, passing through narrow alleys filled with smoke from cooking fires. The wheels rattling against broken pavement. He reaches a crumbling building with a faded sign, Korlubu Teaching Hospital, Children's Ward. He jumps off the bicycle, locks it, hastily grabs a small paper bag of fruit from the basket, and races inside. Up the dim stairwell, 2 steps at a time, ignoring the sharp pain in his chest. Through double doors, into the ward of pale green walls and flickering fluorescent lights. The smell of antiseptic and something deeper sickness struggle. Cut to a small bed near the far window. Ama lies motionless beneath a thin blanket, 9 years old. Skin pale, too pale. Hair thinning from months of illness. IV line taped to a fragile wrist. Kojo approaches, quietly forces a smile onto his face. "Ama," he whispers. Her eyes flutter open, slow, heavy. A faint smile tugs at her lips. "Kojo," she breathes. He sets the fruit aside, sits on the edge of the bed, takes her small hand in his. "I sold some today," he says softly. "We're closer." She tries to nod. Did you write today?" she asks, voice hoarse. Kojo reaches into his pocket, pulls out several crumpled slips of paper. "Of course," he says. "One for you two." He smooths a paper, reads aloud. "I wish for Ama to run again, to dance." Her eyes glisten. I wish you'd sleep more," she says. Kojo grins. Sleep is for old men. He gently strokes her forehead, hiding the worry in his eyes. Cut to later that night. Ama asleep, a faint uneven rise and fall of her chest. Kojo sits by the window, knees drawn up to his chest, gazing out into the darkness. He takes out a battered notebook, pages filled with scrawled wishes. Flashback brief. Wordless montage intercut with present. Young Kojo, perhaps 10 years old, watching his parents' funeral. The first balloon he ever released, trembling hands tying a wish to it. Years of hardship, of empty plates and eviction notices. Ama's diagnosis. The doctor's words a blur as young Kojo held her trembling hand. Back to present. Kojo writes again. Let one person see. Let one person care. He tears the page carefully, folds it small, tucks it into a pocket. Then his gaze shifts to a frayed backpack in the corner. He pulls out a tiny jar inside a few worn coins. His fingers count them silently. Not enough. Never enough. But still he returns the coins, shoulders the pack, and leans over to kiss Ama's forehead. "I'll be back tomorrow," he whispers, "and I'll bring more." Cut to dawn. The city stirs. Smoke from cooking fires curls into the morning air. Kojo rides back toward Labadi beach balloons, bundled in one arm, a new stack of invisible wishes, clutched in the other. As the camera pulls back, rising slowly into the morning sky, Kojo becomes a small figure against the vast landscape of Accra. Invisible to most, but not to all. The sun rose over Accra like a weary king, its light a pale wash across cracked walls and tangled streets. Morning sounds bloomed, the clatter of wooden carts, distant calls of vendors, the low hum of traffic awakening. On the worn steps of a modest flat above a tailor's shop, Kojo sat hunched over his battered notebook. His pen scratched softly in the early silence. "I wish that today even one person believes." He tore the paper, folded it, and added it to a small stack. Nearby, his old canvas bag lay open, cradling a fresh bundle of bright balloons. He glanced at the time, 6:42 am. Time to go. Outside, the streets were already thickening with life. Kojo pedaled steadily toward Labadi Beach, each bump in the road jarring his thin frame. At the park gate, he set up as always alone, but resolute. Balloons in one hand, notebook and pencil in the other, coins jingling faintly in a tin. By midday, the crowd swelled. Tourists with cameras, families escaping the heat, children dragging sun-worn parents toward ice cream stalls. Kojo kept to his rhythm, observe, offer, share. Then, a rough, gravelly voice broke through the air beside him. "Boy, got sweets here. Maybe you sell balloons with them, eh?" An old man, Ebenezer. Skin as dark as river stones, eyes sharp beneath a tattered hat. He pushed a battered cart lined with jars of colorful candies. At his feet, a scruffy old dog with matted fur and weary eyes stood panting in the heat. Bobo. The dog looked up at Kojo, head cocked, tail twitching once, twice. Kojo blinked, surprised. No one had approached him like this in weeks. I only sell balloons, sir," he replied softly. Ebenezer chuckled, a dry, tired sound. "Then we are alike, you and I. Selling things that float or fade." Kojo smiled faintly despite himself. "Your dog was my son's." The old man's gaze clouded for a moment. "He's gone. Now Bobo follows me. Smarter than most folk he is." Bobo padded closer to Kojo, nose twitching near the balloons. The boy knelt, offered his hand. The dog sniffed, then pressed its head against Kojo's palm. A connection forged in an instant, wordless, simple, unbreakable. Ebenezer watched, eyes narrowing. "You write those?" He nodded toward the slips of paper tied to the balloons. Kojo hesitated. Then quietly, "Yes." "And you believe in them?" "I have to," Kojo said. His voice trembled slightly, but steadied. If I didn't, I couldn't get up each day. Ebenezer studied him. Then, without a word, he reached into his cart, pulled out a small striped candy. For your sister, he said simply and walked away. Bobo following but glancing back at Kojo with a soft whine. Kojo's gaze lingered on the pair long after they had faded into the crowd. Days passed. Each morning Kojo returned to his post, and so did Ebenezer and Bobo. They became a quiet trio. Some days Ebenezer brought fruit or old wisdom. Some days only silence. But always Bobo came first to Kojo's side, nuzzling his hand, curling at his feet while he worked. When business was slow, Kojo would talk softly to the dog, telling him about Ama, about their wishes. And sometimes, when no one was watching, he'd tie a small balloon to Bobo's collar, sending the old dog waddling off through the park, drawing smiles from children and puzzled looks from tourists. In these moments, amid the struggle, hope flickered brighter. One particularly hot afternoon, the park buzzed louder than usual. A festival crowd music echoing off the concrete. Kojo sat up as always, Bobo at his side. Midway through the day, a small figure approached a girl no older than 5, gripping her mother's hand. The child stared at the balloon's eyes wide. "One, please," she whispered. Her mother, a tall woman in a faded blue dress, fumbled in her bag. Her face was drawn, exhausted. Kojo selected a soft pink balloon crouched low to the girl's level. "Would you like to make a wish?" he asked gently. The girl nodded. Kojo untied the paper, handed her the pencil. The child wrote with clumsy care, tongue poking from the corner of her mouth. When she finished, she gave it back silently. Kojo glanced at the words, then felt his throat tighten. "I wish Daddy comes home." He retied the slip with reverence, handed the balloon over. The girl beamed, clutching it tightly. But her mother, her eyes filled with sudden tears. She covered her mouth, turned away. Kojo stood frozen, unsure. Bobo rose, padded over, gently pressing against the woman's leg. She looked down, then knelt, burying her face in the dog's ragged fur. The moment hung in the air, raw, human, unguarded. No one around noticed. But Kojo did. He watched, heart heavy yet warm, as Bobo stood still, offering what comfort he could. When the woman finally stood, she met Kojo's gaze. "Thank you," she whispered. And then she was gone, daughter, skipping beside her pink balloon, bobbing in the sun. From across the square, someone had been watching. A woman, mid-50s, pale skin, beneath a wide sun hat, notebook in hand. Eleanor, British accent, tired eyes, clothes that once spoke of wealth, but now whispered of purpose. She had arrived in Accra weeks ago for charity work, searching for untold stories, unspoken struggles. And now her gaze fixed on Kojo, the boy with balloons, and words that moved strangers to tears. She moved closer, blending with the crowd, observing. Saw the dog. Saw the boy's patience. Saw the wishes tied to threadbare strings. A tear slipped down her cheek before she realized it. How many stories go unseen, she thought. Notebook trembling slightly, she wrote, "Find him again. Learn his name. Learn his story." Late afternoon, the crowd thinned. Kojo packed his bag slowly, exhaustion seeping into his bones. As he turned to leave, Bobo trotted alongside, tail swaying. And unseen by them both, Eleanor watched them disappear down the sun-washed street, determination kindling behind her weary eyes. Thus the day ended, another set of wishes carried away on the wind. But this time, unknown to Kojo, one more wish had been born, not on paper. Not tied to a balloon, but in the heart of a stranger who had begun to care. The days grew heavier, their rhythms both familiar and fragile. Each morning, Kojo returned to his post beneath the rusted gates of Labadi Beach Park. Balloons clutched tight pockets, thinner hope, thinner still. But still he came. Still he wrote the wishes. Still he whispered to Bobo and counted coins at sunset. And somewhere beyond the edge of his awareness, eyes watched him. Eleanor. She had not approached, not yet. But she returned again and again, her gaze sharpening through the lens of experience and grief. Her hotel room was cluttered with notes, now scribbled fragments about Ghanaian street life, resilience, poverty's quiet wars. Yet none caught her breath the way Kojo's small acts of hope did. "Invisible wishes," she had written one night. But not invisible children. Each visit she observed more closely, how Kojo stooped to tie a balloon at a child's eye level. How he mended a fraying string with trembling fingers. How Bobo leaned against him when no customers came. But most of all, the tired, fierce light in his eyes when he read each wish aloud. Why this boy? Eleanor wondered. Why won't he break? Still, she did not intervene. Some stories must unfold in their own time. And then the day of the unraveling arrived. It began as any other. A relentless sun. A restless crowd. The scent of sea salt and smoke. Kojo arrived early, breath-ragged eyes clouded from another sleepless night beside Ama's bed. She had grown weaker, paler, thinner, her voice a whisper now. "You will sell many today," she had murmured that morning, small hand gripping his sleeve. "And bring me a mango." Kojo had forced a smile, blinking hard. "A mango, yes, I promise." Now he stood beneath the archway, face drawn taut. Bobo lay at his feet, sensing the shift in his companion's scent fear beneath determination. Mid-morning passed in a blur of half-heard voices and clinking coins. But as the sun climbed higher, a deeper dread pressed into Kojo's chest. An itch behind his ribs, a tug beneath his skin. He checked his watch again. Too fast. Time moving wrong. Then the call came, a trembling ring from the battered phone buried in his pack. His heart stilled. The hospital's number. Hands shaking, he answered. "Your sister? She is worsening. You must come now." The words struck like cold iron. The world narrowed to a single thudding pulse behind his eyes. He barely heard himself thanking the nurse, barely felt the phone fall from his hand. For one breathless moment he stood frozen. Then instinct surged. Abandon the balloons, run. He turned but collided with a broad tourist, stumbled hands scraping pavement. Coins scattered, balloons jolted upward. Nearby, Eleanor's gaze snapped to the scene. She saw the phone, the boy's terror, the sudden flight. And without thinking, she followed. Kojo ran. Through thickening crowds, between honking taxis and street vendors' cries. Bobo loped behind tongue-lolling paws, slapping concrete. The world blurred past him, buildings streaking like ghosts. Faster. I must be faster. His lungs burned. His legs screamed. But still, he ran past market stalls, past alleys choked with smoke, each turn etched into his muscle memory. Finally, the hospital gates. The guards barely registered the blur of boy and dog bursting through. Up the stairwell, 2 steps at a time. Down the dim hall. Children's ward. He skidded to a halt, gasping eyes wide. A nurse rushed forward. "Kojo, her breathing is failing. ICU now." "But payment," her words tangled in panic. Kojo's breath caught. No money. Not enough. "Please save her," he begged, voice raw. Tears blurred his sight. Then a voice behind him. Calm, resolute. "What is needed?" Kojo spun. Eleanor stood there, shoulders squared, eyes blazing beneath her wide hat. She stepped forward, gaze sweeping nurse and boy alike. "Tell me what she needs now." The next moments unfolded in fragments, a desperate blur of motion and noise. Eleanor pressing her credit card into the nurse's trembling hand. Doctors wheeling a pale, fragile Ama toward ICU. Kojo stumbling beside the stretcher, fingers brushing his sister's limp hand. Bobo pacing the hall, whimpering low. And then stillness. Kojo slumped against the wall outside ICU chest, heaving tears spilling unchecked. He had failed her. Again. "I should have been here sooner. I should have." A soft rustle. Eleanor knelt beside him. "You must breathe," she said quietly. "And tell me, who is she to you?" Kojo's mouth opened, but words tangled in grief. Then slowly he began to speak, in halting fragments between gasps and sobs. Of parents lost to fever. Of hunger. Of nights spent beneath cracked roofs. Of a sister's fading laughter. Of balloons tied with invisible hopes. "I sell them," he whispered. "Not just for coins, for something more. For wishes." He opened his battered notebook with trembling fingers, showed her the pages. Scrawled words, childish dreams, fierce prayers. "She writes some too," he added, voice breaking. "She still believes. I must believe too." Eleanor's breath caught. Tears welled unbidden as she traced the faded ink. "You carry the weight of the world, child," she murmured. Kojo's shoulders sagged. "I carry Ama," he said simply, "until she can carry herself again." For a long moment they sat in silence, 2 strangers bound by a single unspoken truth. That hope, though battered, still breathed. Finally, Eleanor spoke. "I can help?" Kojo blinked, weary gaze lifting. "I can help her. And you?" He shook his head. "I have nothing to repay." "I did not ask for payment," she said softly. "Only for truth. And you have given me that." She rose, smoothed her skirt. "I will return, and we will speak again. Rest now. Be with her." As she walked away, Eleanor's heart thundered. She had seen many faces of poverty, but never this hope so raw, so fragile, yet so fiercely guarded by one small boy. Invisible wishes, she thought again. Perhaps no longer invisible. And in her notebook beneath today's date, she wrote, "Help him, whatever it takes." Thus the turning point came silent but seismic. A wish written on faded paper had found its reader. And the winds of fate, so long indifferent, had begun to shift. Outside the ICU window, the world kept moving, unaware that within those pale green walls, a tiny war was being waged. Ama's breaths, shallow and uneven, marked the rhythm of hope and dread. Machines hummed their digital lights, blinking like distant stars, fragile beacons in the dark. Beside her, Kojo sat rigid in a worn chair, fingers intertwined, eyes never leaving her face. His own body ached with exhaustion, but he refused to sleep. Eleanor returned the next day, and the next, and again, each time bringing quiet resolve and unseen threads of help. She had called in favors, written urgent letters to charities she knew. Her voice, once cool and clipped in boardrooms, now carried a sharper edge, driven by purpose. This child will not be lost. 2 days later, the call came. Approval, funding, immediate treatment. The relief struck Kojo like a sudden wave, leaving him breathless. Doctors moved swiftly. Medications flowed through thin tubes. Specialized equipment arrived. Ama, though still frail, began to fight the flicker of life in her eyes, brightening ever so slightly. Kojo wept silently beside her bed. "Thank you," he whispered over and over to Eleanor. But she only shook her head. "It is your fight. I only helped open a door." Another door soon opened. Through conversations with local NGOs, Eleanor had uncovered a new opportunity, a small business training program for youth impacted by poverty. "He has something," she had told the program director. "Watch him work. Watch how he speaks of hope." An invitation arrived, a letter folded neatly handed to Kojo one quiet afternoon. He read it once, twice, hands trembling. "A scholarship," he whispered. Eleanor nodded. "You will learn to build something lasting, for yourself, for her." Tears welled in his eyes. "But, Ama," "She will have care. You can attend during the day, and when needed, leave. They understand." Hope warred with guilt in his heart. Could he dare chase something for himself, while Ama still lay battling unseen demons within her fragile frame? He looked to her, then eyes fluttering open just enough to meet his. "Go," she whispered. "Go learn. Then teach me too." And so he said yes. The first morning dawned cold and gray. Kojo stood outside the training center, notebook clutched against his chest. The Light Foundation, Entrepreneurship for Change. The words seemed impossibly large, the doors impossibly tall. He swallowed hard. Bobo sat beside him, tail sweeping the dust, eyes bright with curiosity. "Stay, boy," Kojo whispered, though his voice wavered. "I won't be long." But as he stepped forward, a soft whine halted him. Turning, he met the dog's pleading gaze. A long pause. Then, smiling faintly, he opened the door wider. "Come then, we begin together." And so they did. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed softly. Rows of plastic chairs faced a whiteboard, scrawled with hopeful slogans. Students milled about, some older, some wary, none entirely comfortable. Kojo took a seat near the back, Bobo curling at his feet. When the instructor entered, a tall man with kind eyes, conversation hushed. "Welcome," he began. "You are here because someone believed in your potential. Now, you must believe too." Kojo listened, heart pounding. Concepts tumbled forth: market research, budgeting, branding. Words he barely understood but yearned to grasp. "I must learn this," he told himself fiercely. "For Ama, for us." But the path would not be easy. Days bled into nights. Each morning class, each afternoon balloons sold beneath the same rusted archway. And each evening, back to the hospital where Ama's condition danced between fragile progress and haunting relapse. He studied by her bedside pages, illuminated by harsh fluorescent light. "Target audience," he whispered aloud, pencil tracing shaky notes. "Revenue stream. Value proposition." Beside him, Ama listened when she could, offering weak smiles. "You'll make a big business," she'd say. "Bigger than the park." Kojo would kiss her brow, tears burning behind his eyes. "One day, for you." But fatigue came like a thief. Nights of fractured sleep stole his clarity. Endless commutes drained his strength. Some mornings the classroom seemed a distant shore he barely reached. Instructors noticed gentle words urging him onward. "We see your effort, Kojo. Rest when you can. Lean on us when needed." But pride held him upright. "I must not falter." Through it all, Bobo remained constant. At the training center, he waited patiently outside, tail thumping. When Kojo emerged weary but determined. At the hospital, he lay curled beneath Ama's bed, rising only when Kojo arrived. When hope faltered, it was Bobo's unwavering gaze that anchored them both. A bond forged in hardship, loyal beyond language, steadfast beyond reason. One evening, a storm descended. Thunder growled across the city. Rain hammered tin roofs. In the ward lights flickered machines beeping anxiously. Kojo sat rigid beside Ama, her breath shallow once more. "Hold on, little one," he whispered. Beside them, Bobo pressed close warm fur, a living shield against the cold. As the hours crawled past, Kojo opened his notebook, hands trembling with exhaustion. "Market segmentation," he read aloud, forcing focus. "Customer experience." His voice cracked, but he continued. "We will build something, Ama. You and I. And Bobo, too." A faint smile ghosted her lips. "I believe you," she murmured. And in that moment, hope ignited anew. Weeks passed. Small victories accrued. Ama's strength flickered, brighter moments of lucidity stretching longer. Kojo's understanding deepened, business plans taking shape upon well-worn pages. "Balloon wishes," he scribbled one night. "Not just to sell, but to give. To create moments. To lift hearts." A vision formed, a fragile seed within tired soil. But still he dared to nurture it. One crisp morning, as Kojo packed for class, Ama grasped his hand. "Today teach me something new," she whispered. Kojo smiled, tears pricking his eyes. "Of course." And that evening, beneath flickering lights, they studied together. He read from his notes, explaining concepts in gentle tones. Ama listened, eyes wide with curiosity. And Bobo lay at their feet, guardian of hope, silent witness to a season reborn. Thus a new chapter began, marked not by ease, but by resilience. Not by abundance, but by purpose. A boy, a sister, a dog, and a dream unfurling beneath uncertain skies. The season had changed, and they would change with it. The humid air of Accra inched towards summer, thick with heat, heavy with possibility. And inside the dim halls of the training center, Kojo's world began to tilt towards something unimaginable. It started with a simple question, one posed almost in passing by the instructor during an early morning session. "What will you build?" The words hung in the stale air, drawing puzzled glances from the small circle of students. Kojo sat still, pencil hovering above his battered notebook. "What will you build?" The question chased him through the rest of the day. Through lectures on financial planning, through long walks between class and hospital, through restless nights by Ama's side. Until one such night when her voice, faint but insistent, broke through his spiraling thoughts. "Tell me, Kojo, what will you build?" He looked at her, heart twisting. I don't know yet." "Then start with something you love," she whispered, small fingers squeezing his hand. "Or someone you love." He stared at her for a long moment, and then the seed took root. The next morning he could barely sit still through class. Concepts blurred together. Business models, marketing strategies, customer journey. But beneath it all, an idea sparked, fragile but insistent. At lunch, as students gathered in small clusters, Kojo sat alone, scribbling furiously. What if balloons could be more? What if they carried more than wishes? His mind raced backward through every face he'd seen light up when a balloon was tied with a dream. What if we gave children an experience, a memory? A moment where the world felt light again. And then beneath the rough sketches in his notebook, he wrote the name, Wish Air. The idea consumed him. That night at Ama's bedside, he spoke of it aloud, voice trembling with both fear and excitement. "It will be called Wish Air," he explained, eyes bright. "A small company. We will bring balloons and birthdays and moments to children who never get them." Ama's eyes widened, a faint smile curling her lips. "You will give them wings," she whispered. Kojo nodded, heart pounding. Yes, wings made of hope. But dreams like balloons needed strong strings to anchor them. And Kojo soon discovered how easily others might try to cut those strings. The first pitch session arrived, a battlefield disguised as a classroom. Each student was asked to present their fledgling ideas, to subject them to the scrutiny of peers and mentors alike. Kojo barely slept the night before. He rehearsed again and again, whispering his speech beside Bobo in the hospital corridor. Wish Air is a company that offers curated birthday experiences for underprivileged children. We will provide balloons, decorations, small gifts, each element infused with a wish, written by the child or their family. Through partnerships with hospitals and community centers, we aim to bring moments of joy where they are most needed. It sounded simple. But to Kojo, it was everything. The day arrived. He stood at the front of the room, trembling palms slick. Bobo waited just outside the door, an unspoken anchor. Kojo took a breath, began. His voice shook at first, but steadied as he spoke of Ama, of the power of a simple balloon of wishes lifted toward an indifferent sky. He spoke of moments stolen by illness of children, forgotten by systems too broken to care. And he spoke of hope, tangible, colorful, within reach. When he finished, the room was silent. Then questions. How will you fund this? Is it scalable? Why would anyone pay for balloons? The words came sharp, skeptical cutting. Kojo swallowed hard, fighting to hold his ground. I will start small. Build partnerships. Seek sponsors. The value is not in the balloon, it's in the moment it creates. But the room remained cold. One peer snorted softly. It's just a charity, not a business. Another shrugged. Cute idea, but too soft for the real world. Kojo's cheeks burned. He gathered his papers in silence, heart bruised but unbroken. Outside, Bobo pressed against his leg, warmth against the rising storm within him. We keep going, he whispered, voice raw. We must. Late that night, he returned to the hospital, more determined than ever. Ama, weaker again, stirred as he entered. Did you tell them? She asked. Yes, he replied, forcing a smile. Some listened, some did not. She squeezed his hand faintly. Then tell the world instead. Her words echoed through him, sparking a new idea, a video. A way to show the dream, not just speak it. We will make them see, he promised. The next days became a blur of furious work. He borrowed an old camera from the training center. Learned basic editing from an older student. Drafted a script by candlelight beside Ama's bed. Bobo accompanied him on every shoot tail wagging, beneath strings of balloons. He filmed children writing wishes in trembling hands. He filmed balloons rising against Accra's smoky skyline. He filmed Ama, frail but smiling, tying her own wish to a bright red balloon. For Kojo's dream, for all children like me. The footage was rough, imperfect, but it pulsed with heart. Late one night, Kojo stitched it together. Eyes burning, fingers trembling. When the final frame faded, he sat in stunned silence. We will show them. The first public event came soon after. A small partnership had been arranged through Eleanor's quiet advocacy with the pediatric ward at the hospital. A birthday celebration for children too sick to leave their beds. Kojo arrived early, Bobo at his sidearms laden with balloons and bright paper garlands. He worked swiftly, transforming the sterile ward into a riot of color. Each child received a balloon. Each balloon bore a wish. And then the video played. Flickering images danced across the makeshift screen. Faces lit with wonder. Hands reaching toward drifting balloons. A chorus of silent hopes lifted into an uncaring sky. The room fell silent as the final frame lingered, a single balloon, rising alone, framed by stars. And then applause. Not polite, not forced. Raw. Joyful. Healing. Tears streamed down Kojo's cheeks. He turned to find Ama propped weakly by a nurse, eyes shining, small hands clapping faintly. You showed them, she whispered. You showed them all. And in that moment, the dream truly began to fly. Thus Wishair was born, not yet a company, not yet a business, but a force of hope lifted on fragile strings and fierce belief. And though the road ahead remained steep, Kojo no longer walked it alone. For in that small ward, beneath a ceiling of rising wishes, a truth had taken flight. Some dreams are too bright to remain unseen. The first wind of trouble came not with thunder, but with a whisper. Kojo was folding balloons late one humid afternoon. His workstation now a small wooden stand outside the hospital, a faded sign reading, Wishair, where wishes fly. Children wandered past, fingers pointing in delight. Nurses smiled. Even parents, heavy with worry, paused to watch the bright orbs float skyward. And then a man stopped before the stand, well-dressed. Sunglasses too dark for dusk. He studied the balloons, the sign. Interesting, he muttered almost to himself. Kojo, used to strangers, simply smiled. Would you like one, sir, for a wish? But the man only turned away, a faint smirk curling his lips, and vanished into the crowd. Kojo thought little of it. One more passerby, one more fleeting moment. But in the weeks that followed, everything began to unravel. It started with posters, bright slick pasted across bus stops and market walls. Wish wonders. Experience the magic of balloon wishes. Kojo stared at the first one in stunned silence. The font was nearly identical. The logo, a balloon trailing a slip of paper, eerily familiar. The slogan, almost word for word, his own. And the company behind it, Skyline Entertainment, one of the largest corporate event firms in Accra. "No," he whispered. "No, it's not possible." But the posters spread. And then billboards. And worse still, a television ad. Footage of balloons, soaring children. Laughing images uncomfortably close to Kojo's own first video. Ama watched the clip from her hospital bed, small hands trembling. "Kojo, that was yours." He swallowed hard, fighting the burn behind his eyes. I don't understand. How could they?" But deep down, a cold truth settled. The man with the sunglasses. The faint smirk. The stolen glance at his stand. Someone had seen his idea, and now they were claiming it for their own. The fallout was swift and brutal. Hospitals began receiving offers, large, polished, backed by funding Wish Air could never match. Sponsors who had once smiled at Kojo's quiet vision now sent polite rejections. "We appreciate your passion, but Skyline offers a more scalable solution." And worst of all, the children noticed. "Look, Mama. The big company does balloons now, too." Kojo forced smiles, forced gratitude. But inside, grief and rage churned sharp as glass. "They are not the same," he whispered to himself. "Not the same." Eleanor noticed first. She found Kojo slumped outside the training center, one rain-slick morning shoulders shaking beneath his thin jacket. Without a word, she sat beside him, umbrella forgotten at her side. "Tell me," she said softly. And so he did. Every bitter detail. When he finished, voice raw, Eleanor's eyes blazed. "This is theft. You must fight." But Kojo only shook his head. "With what I have, no money, no lawyer. They will crush me." Her grip tightened on his shoulder. "Not if you refuse to be silent." Encouraged by her fierce resolve, Kojo scraped together what little he could, coins counted late into the night, favors called in trembling hope. A sympathetic law student from the training center agreed to help for free, but warned, "This will not be easy. They will drag it out, make you bleed what little you have." Still, Kojo pressed on. He filed an official complaint, sent letters, demanded acknowledgement. And for a moment, hope flickered, until the first response arrived. A thick envelope. Corporate letterhead. Legal jargon dripping with icy disdain. "Your client holds no trademark, no prior registration. The concept of balloon wishes is not proprietary. Should you pursue this further, we reserve the right to seek damages for defamation." Kojo's hands shook as he read. "Damages? But Tears blurred the words. "I only wanted to give joy." The law student sighed, folding the letter with gentle fingers. "This is how they fight. With weight, with fear. They want you to give up." And for the first time, Kojo nearly did. That night, unable to sleep, he walked the dark streets alone. Bobo followed, silent, sensing the storm within his friend. They wandered past shuttered stalls beneath flickering street lamps, through alleys choked with damp smoke. "I failed them," Kojo whispered. "Failed Ama. Failed everyone who believed." Bobo whimpered softly, pressing close. But the night offered no comfort. Rain began to fall, thin, icy. And then trouble struck again. In the haze of grief, Kojo didn't notice the patrol truck until it was too late. Two municipal workers, tired and indifferent, spotted the stray dog trailing a ragged boy. "Catch that mutt." Kojo spun too slow. A noose line snapped around Bobo's neck. The dog yelped, thrashed eyes wide with panic. "No!" Kojo screamed, lunging forward. But rough hands shoved him back. "It's illegal for strays to roam. He's going to the pound." "He's not a stray. He's mine, please." They ignored him. Bobo, struggling, locked eyes with Kojo, pleading, terrified. "I'll pay, please, just let me." But the truck roared away, taillights fading into the rain. Kojo collapsed to his knees, broken, shaking alone. By dawn, he was barely coherent. The training center called. The hospital called. Even Eleanor searched for him. But Kojo didn't answer. He wandered back to the hospital at noon, eyes hollow, clothes soaked. Ama gasped when she saw him. "Where's Bobo?" He couldn't speak, only shook his head. She began to cry soft, choking sobs that shredded what remained of his resolve. "I can't do this," he whispered to Eleanor later. "They win. They always win." But she knelt before him, voice fierce, eyes burning. "You cannot let them steal this too. Not your dream, not your hope." "But I have nothing left," he choked. She pressed his trembling hands between hers. "Then we will find what remains, together. Yet even as her words burned bright, Kojo sat in the gathering dark heart, fraying at the edges. The fight had begun. The storm had broken. And now, alone beneath a sky thick with stolen dreams, he stood at the cruelest crossroads of all. Fight on, or finally fall. The world does not stop when a heart breaks. It does not pause for loss. And so even as Kojo staggered through the days with grief coiled tight around his ribs, Accra's streets pulsed on. Vendors shouted. Cars honked. Children played beneath weathered balconies. But to Kojo, the world had narrowed to a silent ache. Bobo was gone. His dream was under siege. And Ama, frail and fading again, watched him with eyes wide with worry. "You must fight," she whispered one night, her voice barely a thread. For Bobo, for Wishair, for us. But Kojo only bowed his head, hands trembling against her blanket. "I'm tired," he whispered. "I'm so tired." But not everyone had surrendered hope. Eleanor moved like a storm through the city. Contacts were called. Journalists briefed. Stories whispered into eager ears. "This is theft," she told them. "This is a child's dream being trampled." And beneath her fury, a deeper warmth burned fierce. "We will not let this go unnoticed." It was her assistant Kwame who first suggested it. "A campaign," he said. "Online, community-driven. Let the children speak." And so Save Wishair was born. The campaign began small. A single post. Eleanor's voice clear beneath the clipped English phrasing. A boy's dream, a sister's hope. A company now threatened by greed. This is not just business. This is human. Help us. Help him. Help them. Within hours, shares began to climb. Then the videos started. Children, some still clutching faded balloons from months past, sent messages of thanks. Kojo made my birthday special. I wished for Mama to get well. I got a book. I had never had one. Simple words. Raw truth. One by one, their voices flooded the net. Parents followed, faces lined with struggle, but eyes shining. This boy brought joy when the world forgot us. He must be heard. He must be helped. The story caught fire. Local influencers picked it up. Then radio hosts. Then a national news segment. Footage of Kojo's small stand. Clips from the hospital ward celebrations. Photos of Kojo with Ama, her smile fragile but bright. And beneath it all, the same refrain. Save Wishair. Donations began to pour in. Small amounts, coins, bills. Messages of hope attached. For the balloons that brought my son joy. For Ama. For the dog. For the boy who dreamed. Within 3 days, the fund had grown beyond expectation. Enough to hire a real lawyer. Enough to cover court fees. Enough to begin the fight anew. But Kojo remained unaware. He had retreated inward, his days a haze of guilt and exhaustion. Until Eleanor found him once more, this time at the hospital garden, sitting beneath a wilting tree. "Come," she said gently. "You must see this." She led him to a borrowed laptop. Together they watched the videos, the children's faces, the parents' pleas, the rising tide of voices behind him. Kojo's breath caught. Tears welled, then fell unchecked. "They remember," he whispered. "They care." Eleanor gripped his shoulder. "Now so must you." And so the fight began again, with a real lawyer, sharp-eyed and fierce now, at their side. "Skyline will not steamroll us," she vowed. "We will prove prior use. We will prove originality." Meetings followed. Documents filed. Statements gathered. But even as momentum grew, Kojo's heart remained divided. One name haunted him still. Bobo. The trail led to a grim place, the municipal animal holding facility. A concrete maze on the city's edge. Cold cages, harsh fluorescent lights. A place where strays went to vanish. "We'll get him back," Eleanor promised. "But you must be prepared." And so Kojo went to war once more. The night of the rescue came swift and tense. Legal papers in hand, supported by Eleanor's contacts, they arrived at the facility. "We have a claim on the dog. He was not stray. He is registered emotional support." Guards grumbled. Resistance rose. "It's late. Come back tomorrow." But Eleanor's lawyer pushed, hard voice like steel. "Now, we have the law." A supervisor arrived, sleepy, irritated. But one glance at the growing crowd outside, supporters who had come after seeing the campaign, shifted the balance. "Fine, one look." Inside, the air was thick with fear and waste. Kojo's heart pounded. "Please, please be here." Rows of cages. Eyes gleaming in the dark. Whimpers. Growls. And then a familiar bark, a desperate hoarse cry. "Bobo!" Kojo sprinted breathless. There behind rusted bars, Bobo crouched, trembling tail thumping weakly. "I'm here, boy, I'm here." Hands fumbled with locks, voices rose, but papers were waved, protests silenced, and at last the cage swung open. Bobo burst forward, leaping into Kojo's arms, whining, licking, crying. And Kojo wept openly, face buried in scruffy fur. "I will never let you go again," he vowed. They returned to the hospital beneath a sky streaked with stars. Ama sat up as they entered, eyes widening. "Bobo!" The dog bounded forward, gently nuzzling her frail frame. She laughed a sound like sunlight through rain. And Kojo, falling to his knees beside them both, wrapped them in trembling arms. "I almost gave up," he whispered. "But never again. Never again." Ama pressed her small hand to his cheek. "We fight, we fly, together." And in that fragile circle boy-girl dog, hope burned bright once more. Thus the darkness lifted, not fully, not forever, but enough to light the way forward. For kindness fierce and wide as the sky had risen to meet them. And the fight for dreams had only just begun. Dawn in Accra broke sharp and clear, the kind of sky that seemed to promise more than survival. In a modest apartment near the hospital walls, still patched from years of wear, Kojo woke to the first morning in weeks, not weighted by despair. Beside him, Ama stirred color stronger in her cheeks, breath easier. And at their feet, Bobo slept, curled tight, tail thumping, as he dreamed. The fight was not over, not yet. But a battle had been won, and now the rebuilding would begin. News of the campaign's success had spread beyond what Kojo could comprehend. Donations continued to arrive. Coins, bills, letters, even toys. And then the calls came. "We represent Child Joy International. We are from Ghana Youth Foundation. We would like to sponsor events with Wishair." Kojo sat at a battered desk, Eleanor beside him, notebook open, trying to process this sudden tide of goodwill. "They see now," Eleanor said softly. "Your light is too bright to hide." Kojo's throat tightened. I don't know how to do all this." "You will learn," she smiled. "And you will lead." The first event was set quickly, almost impossibly so. A community organizer from the old Fadama district, the city's largest informal settlement, had reached out. "Can you bring Wishair here? Many children have never had a birthday at all." Kojo's heart leapt. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "Yes, we will come." Preparations became a blur of joyful chaos. Balloons by the hundreds. Paper garlands. Tiny gifts wrapped in bright cloth. Cakes donated by a local bakery moved by Kojo's story. And at the heart of it all, handwritten slips of paper. "Wishes," Kojo explained to volunteers. "Each child writes one. The balloon carries it not to the sky, but into their hearts." Ama, now stronger, insisted on helping. She sat at the kitchen table, folding paper with small, steady fingers. "We must make them perfect," she grinned. "Every wish matters." Kojo watched her heart swelling with gratitude and awe. "You are my strongest wish come true," he whispered. The morning of the event dawned bright and blistering. Kojo arrived early, cart loaded high, Bobo trotting proudly beside him. Volunteers bustled in the narrow lanes, stringing banners between corrugated roofs, inflating balloons, arranging chairs in the shaded square. Children gathered, wide-eyed, whispers rippling through the crowd. "Is it true a birthday for us? Do we get balloons?" Kojo smiled, kneeling before one small boy. "Today you all have a birthday," he said softly, "and a wish." As the sun climbed, the square transformed. Bright colors danced amid the gray. Laughter replaced the usual clang of metal and rumble of carts. Music pulsed from battered speakers. And then the moment began. Kojo took the small stage, voice steady, eyes shining. "Today is a day for dreams," he said. "For each of you to be celebrated, to believe." He invited the first children forward one by one to write their wishes. Small hands gripped pencils, tongues poked out in concentration. "I wish for books. I wish for a bed. I wish Mama smiles again." Each slip was tied with reverence to a balloon, and as the count began, a hush fell. 3, 2, 1. Hundreds of balloons rose as one, a vibrant tide of color against the blue, carrying fragile hopes into the morning sky. Children laughed, pointed, danced beneath the floating wishes. Parents wiped tears from tired eyes. And in the center of it all, Kojo stood with Ama and Bobo, watching dreams take flight. "We did it," Ama whispered. "You did it," Kojo replied, voice thick. The day unfolded in waves of joy and wonder. Games, cake shared beneath patched awnings, songs sung loud and proud. Kojo moved through it all light on his feet, purpose blazing anew. And everywhere he went, Bobo followed tail high, tongue lolling in joy. Children clustered around the scruffy dog, laughing, petting, tying small ribbons to his collar. "He is our mascot now," one girl declared. "Our brave balloon dog," another added. By day's end, the chant had begun. "Bobo wish air's dog Bobo." And Kojo, kneeling beside his friend, whispered through tears, "You've always been more than that, boy, but now the world knows too." As dusk fell and the square emptied, Kojo sat beneath a string of fading lights, Ama leaning against him. Bobo curled at their feet. "I was so close to giving up," he whispered. Ama took his hand. "But you didn't. You showed us all." "Not alone," Kojo smiled. "Never alone." Eleanor approached then soft steps on worn stone. "It was beautiful," she said simply. Kojo met her gaze, heart full. "Thank you for believing." "Now," she grinned, eyes twinkling, "what's next for Wish Air?" Kojo looked to the stars, voice sure and clear. "We soar higher, for every child, for every wish." And beneath that vast sky, 3 small figures sat wrapped in hope. A boy, a girl, a dog, together reborn with dreams that would no longer be stolen. Victory is never without consequence. For all the joy the old Fatima celebration had brought, winds of resistance had begun to gather again. It came first in the form of silence, then thinly veiled threats, an envelope delivered by a messenger in an expensive suit, a letter, legal language spun in elegant venom. "Cease all public events until full investigation is complete. Unauthorized use of concept, trademark pending, infringement penalties apply." Kojo's heart pounded as he read. "But we," Eleanor snatched the paper, eyes flashing. "They are pushing back, harder now. They smell your momentum." She glanced at him, fierce and resolute. "We fight on." The fight this time would be public. The case had drawn national attention. Too many voices now, too many eyes watching. Skyline's lawyers had proposed a community arbitration, a public hearing broadcast live, thinly masked as goodwill, but intended to sway public opinion and corner Kojo. "They think you will fold," Eleanor warned. "I won't," Kojo said softly. "Not this time." The hearing was scheduled for a week later. Ama sat beside Kojo in the small apartment, her strength returning, her spirit brighter. "You will tell them the truth," she whispered. "Yes, and I will be there." Kojo froze. "Ama, it will be hard. It will be long. You need rest." But her eyes shone with stubborn light. Dreams cannot be defended in silence. He pulled her close, voice shaking. "Only if you feel strong enough." "I am." And in her voice, he heard the truth. The day arrived. Accra's main civic hall buzzed with reporters, citizens, and legal observers. Cameras lined the chamber walls. Screens across the city prepared to broadcast. Kojo stood outside, Eleanor beside him. Bobo pressed warm against his leg. "They will try to humiliate you," Eleanor whispered. "Let them try," Kojo replied, eyes burning bright. "And Ama, she comes when she's ready." Inside the room was split. One side held the polish of corporate wealth, Skyline's team flanked by sharp-suited lawyers, the company director seated with a smirk that curled like smoke. Opposite, Kojo stood alone, save for Eleanor, and the lone attorney they'd hired with the community support. "We begin," the moderator announced. The cameras rolled. The proceedings moved swift and sharp. Skyline's counsel spoke first, words oiled with civility, undercut with blades. "Our client has registered the concept lawfully. The boy's use, though admirable, lacks formal foundation or legal precedent. We respect his intentions, but intentions do not constitute ownership. Our client invested significant resources to elevate the idea. Surely this benefits all." Kojo's fists clenched. They dressed theft in courtesy, he thought bitterly. Then his turn came. He stood slowly, hands trembling, then stilling as he gripped the podium. His voice began low but rose with each word. "I never wanted to own a wish," he said, "only to share them. I wrote them first, by hand. I gave them freely before any logo, before any lawyer's word. You took them not to help but to profit." The room murmured, shifting beneath the truth's weight. Skyline's director leaned forward, voice silk in shadow. "Do you have proof, boy? Do you think sentiment outweighs law?" Kojo's breath caught, then steadied. "I have the truth, and 1,000 wishes that will not be bought." The hearing pressed on, arguments volleyed like arrows, documents waved, timelines debated. Kojo spoke as best he could, heart first, words raw but true. Yet weariness crept in. Doubt coiled cold. "They are too strong," he thought. "Too many. Then a soft commotion near the entrance. He turned and Hope walked through the door. Ama entered, small frame, upright gaze blazing fierce as the cameras caught her. Gasps rippled. "She is here." Kojo's breath broke, then steadied with hers. She stepped to the podium, nodding at the moderator. "May I speak?" "You may," the moderator replied, voice gentle, and the hall hushed. Ama's voice rose soft at first, then clear as glass. "My brother did not sell balloons to be rich. He gave dreams to those like me, sick, forgotten, unseen. I was one of them. I wrote wishes when I could not walk. I held balloons when I could not hope." She turned, eyes locking with the director's. "You cannot steal what belongs to the heart. You cannot own a dream. You can print signs and buy screens. But you will never buy what my brother gave us, because dreams do not have price tags. And wishes," her voice caught, then soared, "cannot be stolen." The room stood frozen air electric with truth. Even Skyline's counsel faltered, papers fluttering, uncertain hands. And as Ama stepped down, the crowd erupted, applause, cheers, tears. Kojo caught her in his arms, both trembling with the force of the moment. "You were perfect," he whispered. "We are perfect," she smiled, eyes shining. The hearing closed swiftly after. The moderator's voice rang clear. "Based on evidence, testimony, and public record, we find in favor of Wish Air. The concept's origin predates registration. Skyline shall cease all associated activities and issue public apology." The hall exploded, cheers, tears, cameras flashing like stars. Kojo stood, tears falling unchecked. Ama pressed tight to his side, Bobo leaping joyous at their feet. "We did it," Ama whispered. "Together," Kojo replied. And beneath the blaze of lights, a boy, a sister, and a dog stood victorious. Not by law alone, but by the weight of dreams too bright to steal. The ruling rippled across Ghana like a sudden wind through dry leaves, unexpected, impossible, undeniable. Wish Air had won, and with victory came something harder to define: recognition. For weeks after the public hearing, Kojo could barely walk the streets without someone stopping him. "You're the boy with the balloons. My daughter saw you on TV. She wants to meet you. You gave us hope." The words humbled and overwhelmed him. But amid it all, the real work began anew. Eleanor moved swiftly, her network now, an army of willing allies, with legal precedent on their side. Wish Air applied for and received full operational certification, the official stamp that opened doors Kojo had only dared dream of. "You are now recognized across Ghana," Eleanor said, handing him the embossed document. "This means we can grow?" Kojo asked, voice trembling. "Yes," she smiled, "and many wish to help you." The first offers came from cities Kojo had never visited: Cape Coast, Kumasi, Tamale. Organizations and communities reached out. "Bring Wish Air here. Our children need these moments." Kojo stood before a map of Ghana one late night, eyes wide, heart racing. "I cannot do it all alone," he whispered. Ama grinned from her chair nearby, cheeks flush with new health, eyes alight. "No one said you would," she teased. "You'll need a team. You'll teach them. And you," he smiled. "I will teach the children to wish." And in that promise, the new path unfurled. The first major event came sooner than expected. A national children's welfare group contacted Eleanor, proposing a mass Wish Air celebration on Labadi Beach. Hundreds of children, hundreds of balloons. One great moment of healing and hope broadcast live across Ghana. Kojo's breath caught when Eleanor told him. "Labadi Matson," he whispered. "Where it began." She nodded, eyes soft. "Yes, and now it begins again." Preparations consumed them for days. Balloons ordered in bulk, every color imaginable. Local artists donated time to craft banners and stage backdrops. Volunteers arrived by the dozens, many of them children who had once received Kojo's balloons. "We remember," one boy said, "no older than 12. We want others to remember too." Kojo's throat closed. "Thank you," he managed. And beside him, Ama beamed with quiet pride. The morning of the event arrived beneath a sky of molten gold. Labadi Beach thrummed with life. Children from across the country gathered beneath towering palms, eyes wide with wonder. News cameras rolled. Drones hovered above. Vendors lined the outskirts, but the heart of the day belonged to the children. "Today," Eleanor said softly, "they will not forget." Kojo stood near the center stage, gaze sweeping the sea of faces, his sea of wishes. "I once stood here with nothing," he thought. Today I stand with them all. The ceremony began with music, local drums pulsing beneath the hum of the waves. Then speeches brief but heartfelt. "This is not about balloons," a community leader said. "It is about dreams given wings." Finally, Kojo approached the stagehands, trembling, but steady Bobo at his side. Ama front and center among the children. The crowd hushed. "I am not special," he began, voice carrying across sand and surf. "I was a boy with a notebook and a sister who taught me hope. I wrote wishes because they were all I had. And now, because of you all, they fly higher than I ever dreamed." He paused, emotion catching his breath. "Today we send them higher still." The children stepped forward one by one, each handed a balloon with string and a small paper slip. Under Kojo's gentle guidance they wrote, "I wish my brother would walk again. I wish for school. I wish for food every day. I wish Mama would laugh." Hundreds of wishes, hundreds of fragile hopes penned in trembling hands, tied with trembling hearts. As the moment approached, Kojo led the count. "Are we ready?" he called. "Yes!" Voices rang back, a chorus of young power. Then together, we release hope. 3, 2, 1. The sky erupted. Balloons soared, waves of color rising into the blue, a living constellation of dreams. Gasps, laughter, tears. Children pointed and danced, eyes tracking their wishes as they climbed higher and higher. And beneath it all, Kojo stood with Ama and Bobo, arms wrapped tight around them, both tears streaming unchecked. "Real balloons," Ama whispered. "Real wishes. Real hope," Kojo breathed. The images traveled far. News anchors called it the Day of Wishes. Social media blazed with clips of balloons rising against sun and sea. Kojo's name became known beyond Accra, his story told in classrooms, in churches, in living rooms across Ghana. And soon requests arrived for him to speak, to teach, to inspire. At first he hesitated. "I'm no speaker," he told Eleanor, but she smiled gently. "You are more than that. You are a bearer of light. Share it." The first speaking event came at a local university. Kojo stood backstage, heart racing, palms slick. "What if I fail?" he whispered. Ama gripped his hand. "You can't fail if you speak the truth." He swallowed, then stepped forward, and when he spoke, the room held its breath. "I was a boy with nothing. I wrote wishes because hope was all I had. All of you have power I never dreamed of. Use it, lift others, make their wishes fly." More invitations followed. Conferences, schools, charity galas. And everywhere he went, he brought his notebook. Pages filled with wishes. Pages filled with voices unheard. He read them aloud, and in every room, eyes shone, hearts stirred. "These are not my words," he would say. "They are the dreams of children who deserve to be heard." Wishair grew not as a company of profit, but as a movement of hope. Franchise partners launched programs in distant cities, trained by Kojo's simple, unwavering philosophy. A balloon is not just air, it is belief made visible. And through it all, Kojo remained grounded. At each major event, he knelt beside Ama and Bobo, smiling, remembering the boy he once was. "We built this together," he would tell them. And Ama would always reply, "And we fly still." Thus the real balloons rose not from plastic strings, but from hearts, stitched with courage and bound by dreams too bright to fade. And in Ghana's skies, hope soared higher than it ever had before. The heat of late afternoon hung heavy over Accra, the streets shimmering beneath layers of dust and sun. At the edge of the old marketplace, beneath a newly painted wooden stall, Kojo arranged the last of the balloons. There was no fanfare this day, no cameras, no stage. Just a humble return to where it all began. Wishair now operated across Ghana, but this was his own ritual. Every month he returned to the market. Every month he stood at this stall, offering balloons to any child who asked, free of charge. "We remember where we began," Ama always told him. And today he stood alone, the late sun painting his skin gold. Bobo rested beneath the table, aging now, but ever watchful, his graying muzzle resting atop folded paws. A breeze tugged at the strings balloons, swaying like gentle prayers. Kojo breathed deep, the simple joy of it filling him more than any stage ever could. The crowd was thin this day. A few familiar faces passed with smiles. A mother with a baby strapped to her back stopped to chat briefly. An old man tipped his hat in respect. And then she appeared, a small girl, alone, dust on her feet. Dress faded and too large, eyes wide beneath a curtain of tangled hair. She paused at the edge of the stall, silent, watching the balloons sway. Kojo noticed her immediately. Something in her gaze caught his breath. Not hunger, not even longing. Wonder. "Hello?" he said gently. "Would you like one?" The girl blinked, then nodded. "Come, choose any you like." She approached slowly, bare toes scuffing the dirt, then reached a small hand toward a sky-blue balloon. Kojo smiled. A beautiful choice. He knelt, selecting a slip of paper, smoothing it with practiced fingers. "Now your wish." The girl hesitated, then met his gaze. I cannot write." Her voice was soft, wary. Kojo's heart ached. "Then tell me. I will write it for you." She bit her lip, then whispered, "That no one is forgotten." Kojo stilled the words, piercing deeper than any he had heard. He wrote carefully, "No one is invisible when there is love." He read it aloud, watching her face. She nodded, eyes glistening. "Yes, that is my wish." He tied the slip gently to the string, then handed her the balloon. She gripped it tight, smiling a small, shy smile. "Thank you," she whispered. Kojo's throat tightened. "No," he replied softly. "Thank you." As she turned to leave, Kojo's gaze lingered. The girl walked slowly toward the open square balloon bobbing above her. Then without warning, she stopped. She looked up, watching the balloon, and with small, determined fingers, she let it go. Kojo held his breath. The balloon rose slow and sure, carrying her wish into the widening sky. The girl stood watching, face-lifted, eyes alight. Kojo's chest swelled with something too vast for words. The camera holds on him, still crouched, eyes following the single balloon. Then slowly he rises. He steps to the edge of the square. Ama approaches, older, now taller, health glowing in her skin. "I saw," she whispers. Kojo smiles faintly. "So did I." Beside them, Bobo pushes to his feet, tail wagging once, then still. Together, the three of them watch. And the camera tilts upward, following the lone balloon as it climbs. Higher, past the tangled wires of the city, past rusted rooftops, into the vast, endless blue. The sun catches it, a glimmering speck against the heavens, and slowly it fades into the light. Soft music rises, a gentle, aching melody. The scene dissolves, fading from the balloon to the scattered faces of children across Ghana. Hands releasing balloons, eyes alight with hope. Dreams written on slips of fragile paper. Smiles, laughter, tears. Final shot, Kojo's notebook. Pages turning in the breeze. A last written line, visible before the page, turns. No one is invisible when there is love.